The door chimed at 11:43, and Sophia White looked up from her paperwork to see a man standing in the entrance, dripping rainwater onto the clinic floor, his white hair plastered to his face, his eyes the color of dark wine catching the fluorescent light in a way that made her breath hitch. He held something small and soaked against his chest. "You need to save this," he said, and his voice carried the weight of someone who had never been told no in his entire life. Sophia stood, her sneakers squeaking on the linoleum as she rounded the desk. "What is it?" "A kitten." He stepped forward, and she caught sight of the tiny creature shivering in his pale hands. Its fur was matted, its eyes barely open, its breathing shallow. "I found it in a storm drain." It was crying. The admission sounded like it embarrassed him. Sophia took the kitten carefully, feeling how cold it was, how fragile. "Come back to the exam room. Dr. Harris is still here finishing surgery." The man followed her without asking permission, and she was acutely aware of his presence behind her, tall and commanding in a way that made the hallway feel smaller. She pushed through the door to the largest exam room and set the kitten gently on the table under the warming light. "I'll get the doctor," she said. But when she turned, he was already pulling off his soaked coat, revealing a black shirt that clung to a frame that looked carved from marble. "I'll wait," he said simply. Dr. Harris came in moments later, took one look at the kitten, and went to work. Sophia assisted, passing instruments and towels, warming blankets and fluids. The man stood against the wall, perfectly still, watching everything with an intensity that should have been unnerving, but instead felt oddly reassuring. 40 minutes later, doctor. Minutes. Harris straightened and pulled off her gloves. "She'll make it. Hypothermic, malnourished, maybe 6 weeks old. Someone abandoned her or she wandered from a feral litter. Lucky you found her when you did." The man's shoulders relaxed fractionally. "Good." Dr. Harris left with instructions for overnight monitoring, and Sophia busied herself settling the kitten into a heated recovery cage with soft bedding. When she finished, she turned to find the man still watching. "She'll need to stay here for a few days," Sophia explained. "We'll get her stabilized, vaccinated, checked for parasites. After that, we can talk about adoption or fostering." "I want her," he said immediately. Sophia blinked. "You want to adopt her?" "Yes." He said it like it was the most obvious thing in the world, though something in his expression suggested he was surprising himself as much as her. "Okay, we'll need you to fill out some paperwork. Name, address, contact information." She grabbed a clipboard from the counter. He took it, glanced at it, then looked at her. "My name is Sabin Thorne. I'll write down the rest." The name fit him, old and elegant and somehow dangerous. Sophia watched him write in precise, slanted script that looked like it belonged in another century. When he handed the clipboard back, she noticed his address was in the warehouse district downtown, the part that had been renovated into expensive lofts and penthouses. "You can call to check on her any time," Sophia offered, "or visit during business hours." Sabin's dark eyes held hers. "What are the visiting hours?" 9 to 7, 7 days a week. "I'll be here tomorrow." He pulled his coat back on, still damp, and paused at the door. "Thank you for saving her." Then he was gone, leaving only wet footprints and the lingering sense that something significant had just happened, though Sophia couldn't have explained what. She looked at the kitten sleeping in the cage, its tiny chest rising and falling steadily now, and felt a smile tug at her lips. Sabin arrived the next day at 9 exactly. Sophia was restocking exam rooms when the front desk buzzed her. "There's a man here to see the kitten from last night," Jenny, the morning receptionist, said over the intercom. "Says his name is Sabin." Sophia's heart did an unexpected flip. "I'll be right there." He stood in the waiting room looking completely out of place among the cheerful pet posters and plastic chairs. In daylight, or rather, in the fluorescent lighting, since the day outside was overcast, she could see him more clearly. His skin was pale, almost luminous, his features sharp and aristocratic. He wore all black again, expensive and perfectly tailored, and when he saw her, something in his expression softened. "How is she?" he asked. "Much better. Do you want to see her?" He nodded, and she led him back to the recovery room. The kitten was awake, curled in her bedding, and when Sophia opened the cage, she mewed softly. Sabin reached in with surprising gentleness, letting the kitten sniff his fingers before stroking her head with one careful finger. "She's eating," Sophia said, "gaining strength. Another day or two and she'll be bouncing off the walls." Good. Sabin kept his attention on the kitten, but Sophia saw the corner of his mouth curve slightly, and it transformed his face from imposing to something warmer, more human. Except he wasn't human. She knew that with a certainty she couldn't explain. She'd lived in the city long enough to hear the rumors, see the occasional white-haired figure moving through the downtown district at night, know that some old families never aged and never went out in daylight. Vampires were real, acknowledged if not openly discussed, and they kept to themselves in the old treaties. She'd just never expected one to bring her a kitten. "Have you thought of a name?" she asked. Sabin withdrew his hand and looked at her. "Not yet. I'm not good at naming things. You could wait until you get to know her personality." "That seems wise," he paused. "When can she leave?" "Probably 3 days. We'll want to make sure she's fully recovered and has her first round of shots." "I'll come back tomorrow." He did. And the day after that, each visit he stayed a little longer, asked more questions about care and feeding and what the kitten would need. Sophia found herself looking forward to 9 o'clock, to the moment when the door would open and Sabin would walk in. Always punctual, always focused entirely on either the kitten or on Sophia when she was explaining something. On the third day, when Dr. Harris cleared the kitten for release, Sophia found herself oddly reluctant to say goodbye. "She'll need a follow-up in 2 weeks, she told Sabin as he signed the discharge papers. "We'll check her weight, make sure she's adjusting well. I'll bring her back." Sabin accepted the carrier with the kitten inside, then met her eyes. "Thank you. For everything." "It's my job," Sophia said, though they both knew it was more than that. He left, and the clinic felt emptier. But exactly 2 weeks later, he returned. The kitten had grown, her fur now fluffy and clean, her eyes bright and curious. The checkup went perfectly, and afterward, Sabin lingered in the exam room. "She's doing well," Sophia said, scratching the kitten under the chin. "You're clearly taking good care of her." "She's easy to care for," Sabin replied, demanding but clear about what she wants. Sophia laughed. "That's cats for you." Sabin's gaze was steady on her face. "Would you like to see her at home? Make sure the environment is suitable." It was the thinnest excuse either of them had ever heard, but Sophia found herself nodding. "That's very responsible of you. When?" "Tonight, if you're free, I could send a car. I get off at 8. 8 then." The car that picked her up was sleek and black, and driven by a silent man who opened doors with military precision. Sophia felt underdressed in her jeans and sweater, but it was too late to back out now. They drove to the warehouse district, pulled into an underground garage, and took a private elevator that opened directly into a penthouse that made her breath catch. The space was massive, all exposed brick and dark wood, modern furniture mixed with antiques that looked genuinely old. Floor-to-ceiling windows showed the city lights glittering in the darkness, and there, perched on the back of a leather sofa, was the kitten. "She's claimed that spot," Sabin said, appearing beside Sophia. "She watches the city." Sophia moved into the space, taking it in. "This is beautiful. It's home." He gestured to the seating area. "Please." They sat, and the kitten immediately jumped down to investigate Sophia, purring as she rubbed against her legs. Sophia picked her up, cuddling the warm weight, and looked at Sabin. "She's happy here. You've done everything right." "I had help." His expression was serious. "I've never had a pet before, never had reason to." "Why now?" The question came out before Sophia could stop it. Sabin was quiet for a long moment. "I heard her crying in the storm. I've walked past suffering before without stopping, but that night I couldn't. I don't know why." He paused. "That's not true. I think I was tired of being the person who walks past." The honesty in his voice struck something deep in Sophia's chest. "You saved her life. Perhaps she saved something in mine." They looked at each other, and the air between them felt charged with possibility. Over the following weeks, Sabin found reasons to visit the clinic. Questions about the kitten's diet, concerns about her behavior that were never quite urgent, but always gave him an excuse to see Sophia. And Sophia, in turn, found reasons to extend the conversations, to suggest home visits, to check on things that didn't really need checking. They were circling each other, careful and deliberate, and both of them knew it. One evening, after a visit where they'd ended up talking for 2 hours while the kitten slept between them on the sofa, Sabin walked Sophia to the elevator. "I enjoy your company," he said quietly. "More than I've enjoyed anyone's in a very long time." Sophia's heart hammered. "How long?" A century, give or take. There it was, the confirmation of what she'd suspected. You're vampire royalty, aren't you? I've heard the stories about the king in the warehouse district. Sabin inclined his head. Does it frighten you? Should it? Most things about me should frighten you. Sophia stepped closer, watching his eyes widen fractionally. You brought a kitten to an emergency vet in the middle of a storm. You visit her every week. You ask questions and listen to the answers. You're not frightening, Sabin. You're kind. Something in his expression cracked open. I haven't been kind in a very long time. Maybe you're remembering how. He reached up slowly, giving her time to pull away, and brushed a strand of hair from her face. His fingers were cool but not cold, gentle but certain. I would like to see you outside of veterinary consultations. Like a date. Exactly like a date. Sophia's smile felt like sunlight. I'd like that too. They went to dinner the following night at a restaurant that didn't open until 10, the kind of place where the clientele was exclusively vampires and those who knew the night world. Sophia felt the weight of curious stares as Sabin led her to a private table, his hand resting lightly on the small of her back, proprietary and protective. They're staring, she murmured. Let them. His voice carried an edge of command. You're with me. That's all they need to know. The dinner was perfect. They talked about everything and nothing, her childhood in the suburbs, her decision to study veterinary medicine, his long life, and the ways the world had changed. He was surprisingly easy to talk to, asking questions that showed he was genuinely interested, sharing stories that were by turns funny and melancholy. Do you miss it? Sophia asked over dessert. The old days? Sabin considered. I miss the pace, the quiet. But the modern world has its advantages. Medicine, technology, you. The last word hung in the air between them. You didn't know me before, Sophia pointed out, her pulse quickening. No, but I know you now, and that makes the modern world considerably more appealing. She reached across the table, and he met her halfway, their fingers intertwining. His touch sent electricity up her arm. I haven't done this in a long time either, she admitted. Dated, I've been focused on work. Then we'll figure it out together. They did. Over the next month, they fell into a pattern. Sabin would visit the clinic, then wait for Sophia to finish her shift. They'd have dinner, or walk through the city at night, or return to his penthouse where they'd talk until dawn forced him away from the windows. The kitten became their shared project, a bridge between their worlds. Sophia taught Sabin how to play with her, how to read her moods, how to love something small and vulnerable. And in teaching him, Sophia realized she was falling in love. Sabin changed. His court noticed first. The vampire king, who had ruled with iron control for over a century, began showing up to councils with a softer edge, making decisions that balanced mercy with justice instead of defaulting to the harsh precedents of old law. He smiled more. He listened more. When his second-in-command, a vampire named Lucian with shrewd eyes and careful manners, asked if everything was well, Sabin had answered honestly, I'm happy. The words had felt strange in his mouth, like a language he'd forgotten he knew. But happiness made him vulnerable, and in the vampire world, vulnerability was an invitation. The challenge came on a Tuesday night. Sophia was at Sabin's penthouse, curled on the sofa with the kitten in her lap, when the elevator opened without warning. 3 vampires stepped out, and Sophia knew immediately that something was wrong. They moved with predatory grace, their white hair and pale skin marking them as old and powerful, their expressions carved from ice. Sabin rose from his seat beside Sophia, positioning himself between her and the intruders. Cassius, he said, and his voice was colder than Sophia had ever heard it. You come uninvited. The vampire in front, tall and angular with eyes like frozen silver, inclined his head in a mockery of respect. Forgive the intrusion, my king, but we have concerns that require immediate address. Then address them. Cassius's gaze flicked to Sophia, dismissive and calculating. Your court wonders if you remain fit to rule. A king who softens becomes a liability. A king who takes human lovers forgets where his loyalties should lie. Sophia's blood turned to ice, but Sabin didn't move, didn't flinch. My fitness to rule is not your determination to make, Sabin said quietly, and my personal life is not your concern. It becomes our concern when it affects your judgment. Cassius stepped forward. You've granted mercy to lawbreakers, delayed executions, questioned traditions that have kept our people safe for centuries, all since you found that pet and the woman who tends it. The contempt in his voice made Sophia's hands curl into fists, but before she could speak, Sabin moved. It was faster than human sight could track, and suddenly he was in front of Cassius, his hand around the other vampire's throat, his face a mask of controlled fury. Choose your next words very carefully, Sabin said softly, because they may be your last. Cassius didn't struggle, but his companions tensed. The air in the penthouse crackled with potential violence. You prove my point, my king, Cassius managed. You react with emotion rather than reason. This is not the ruler we swore to follow. Sabin held him a moment longer, then released him, stepping back but not retreating. You speak of tradition and strength as if they're the same thing. They're not. I have ruled for over a century with the very qualities you claim to value, and what has it gained us? Fear. Isolation, a kingdom that grows smaller with each passing decade because we cannot adapt. He turned, his gaze sweeping over all three vampires. I have not weakened. I have woken up. There's a difference. Pretty speech, Cassius said, rubbing his throat. But words won't satisfy the court. If you wish to continue ruling, you'll need to prove that this new softness hasn't made you vulnerable. I challenge your right to lead, Sabin Thorne, under the old laws. The room went deathly silent. Sophia knew enough about vampire politics to understand what that meant. A direct challenge to the king's authority, to be settled by trial or combat. It was rare, dangerous, and deadly serious. Sabin's expression didn't change. You invoke old laws while condemning me for keeping them. Interesting strategy. Will you accept? I don't have a choice. The law is the law. Sabin's voice was steady, but Sophia saw the tension in his shoulders. Name your terms. 3 nights from now, the old court, trial by combat with the council as witness. If you win, I submit and the matter is settled. If I win, I take the crown and the court decides your fate. Agreed. Sabin's tone was flat. Now leave my home. Cassius and his companions left as quickly as they'd come, the elevator doors closing on their pale, satisfied faces. The moment they were gone, Sophia stood, setting the kitten carefully on the sofa. Sabin. He turned to her, and the expression on his face made her heart break. It wasn't fear or anger. It was resignation. I'm sorry you had to see that, he said quietly. Don't apologize. Sophia crossed to him, taking his hands. What can I do? Nothing. This is vampire business, and you're human. He squeezed her fingers gently. You should stay away from me until this is resolved. Being associated with me right now puts you at risk. Absolutely not. Sophia's voice was fierce. I'm not leaving you to face this alone. Sophia, no, you told me you were tired of being the person who walks past suffering. Well, I'm not the person who abandons someone I care about when things get hard. She stepped closer, tilting her face up to his. We're in this together. You, me, and the kitten you rescued from a storm drain, because you couldn't stand to hear her cry. That person, the one who stops and helps and cares, that's who you are now. That's who I'm staying with. Sabin's control cracked. He pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly, his face buried in her hair. I don't deserve you. Yes, you do. Sophia wrapped her arms around him, feeling the tension in his body, the fear he wouldn't voice. And you're going to win this challenge, and we're going to figure out the rest together. They stood like that for a long time, finding strength in each other, while the kitten watched from the sofa with curious, knowing eyes. The next 3 days were tense. Sabin spent his time preparing, meeting with loyal members of his court, ensuring that regardless of what happened, the transition of power would be smooth. Lucian, his second, visited twice, bringing information about Cassius's support in the court and offering his own quiet assurance that most still supported their king. Cassius has ambition, but not wisdom, Lucian said. The court knows this, but they need to see that you haven't forgotten your strength. Sophia spent the days learning everything she could about vampire politics and combat. She visited Sabin each evening, bringing him food he didn't need but appreciated, sitting with him while he planned and prepared, offering her presence as an anchor. On the second night, while they sat together watching the city lights, Sabin spoke suddenly. "If I lose," he began. "You won't." "If I lose," he continued, his voice gentle but firm, "Lucian will ensure you're protected. I've made arrangements. You'll be safe." Sophia turned to him, her eyes burning. "Stop talking about losing. You're the strongest person I know. Strength isn't always enough. Then be smart too. Be the person who changed, who grew, who learned to care. That's not weakness, Sabin. That's evolution. That's survival." She cupped his face in her hands. "You are not the same vampire you were a century ago, and that's good. Don't let Cassius make you think otherwise." He kissed her then, and it was desperate and tender, and full of everything they hadn't said yet. When they broke apart, his forehead rested against hers. "I love you," he whispered. "I didn't think I was capable of it anymore, but I do." Sophia's breath hitched. "I love you too. That makes this worth it. Whatever happens, knowing you, loving you, it makes everything worth it." The night of the challenge came too quickly. The old court was exactly what it sounded like, a vast underground chamber beneath the city that predated the modern streets by centuries. Sophia descended the stone steps on Lucian's arm, her heart pounding, her dress borrowed from Sabin's collection, black and elegant and making her feel like she was attending something between a coronation and a funeral. The chamber was packed. Vampires lined the walls, filled the ancient stone seats, their white hair and pale faces creating a sea of ghostly observers. At the center was a cleared space, circular and marked with symbols that looked older than memory. Sabin stood on one side, dressed in black, his posture regal and composed. Cassius stood opposite, equally formal, equally controlled. Between them stood an elderly vampire woman with hair like snow and eyes like amber. Her voice, when she spoke, carried through the chamber without effort. "Cassius of House Moreau challenges Sabin Thorne, king of the Night Court, on grounds that the king has grown soft and unfit to rule. This challenge will be settled by single combat, to submission or death. Do both parties accept the terms?" "I accept," Sabin said. "I accept," Cassius echoed. "Then begin." What happened next was too fast for Sophia's eyes to fully track. The two vampires moved like lightning, striking and blocking with speed that blurred the air. She saw flashes of violence, heard the impact of blows that would have shattered human bones. Cassius was skilled, vicious, aiming for weak points with the precision of someone who had studied his opponent. But Sabin was stronger, more experienced, and he fought with something Cassius lacked: purpose. He wasn't fighting to hold on to power for power's sake. He was fighting for the right to continue the path he'd started, the one that led away from the cold isolation of centuries and toward something warmer, more human, more real. He was fighting for love. The battle turned when Cassius overextended, committing to a strike that left his side exposed. Sabin took the opening, moving inside his guard and striking with controlled force that sent Cassius sprawling. Before the other vampire could recover, Sabin was on him, his hand around Cassius's throat, his knee pinning him to the stone floor. "Yield," Sabin commanded. Cassius struggled, but it was useless. Sabin's grip was iron, his position unbreakable. "Yield," Sabin repeated, "or die. Choose." The chamber held its breath. Finally, Cassius stopped struggling. "I yield." Sabin held him a moment longer, making sure the submission was genuine, then released him and stood. He looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of his subjects, and when he spoke, his voice carried absolute authority. "I am your king. That has not changed. What has changed is that I remember why I fought for this crown in the first place. Not to rule with cruelty, but to protect our people, to lead them into a future where we are more than survivors hiding from the sun. I make no apologies for growing, for learning, for allowing myself to care again." His gaze found Sophia in the crowd, and his expression softened. Strength is not the absence of feeling, it's the courage to feel and continue forward anyway. If you cannot follow a king who understands that, then challenge me as he did. But know that I will defend my right to rule and my right to live as I choose, every single time. The silence stretched, then broke as vampires began nodding, murmuring agreement, the tension dissolving into acceptance. Lucian stepped forward and knelt, a gesture that was immediately copied by others throughout the chamber. It became a wave, vampires acknowledging their king, supporting his authority. Cassius, still on the ground, watched with bitter eyes but didn't protest. He'd made his challenge and lost. That was the end of it. The elderly woman raised her hand, and silence fell again. The challenge is satisfied. Sabin Thorne remains king. This matter is closed. The formal pronouncement released the court, and vampires began filing out, their voices rising in conversation. Sophia pushed through the crowd, making her way to the center where Sabin stood speaking quietly with Lucian. When he saw her, he broke off mid-sentence and closed the distance between them. She crashed into his arms, not caring who saw, relief and love flooding through her in equal measure. "You won," she breathed. "I had a reason to," he replied, holding her tightly. Lucian cleared his throat politely. "If I may suggest, my king, perhaps you'd like to take your leave. I can handle the remaining formalities." Sabin pulled back just enough to look at his second. "Thank you, Lucian." They left the old court together, climbing back into the modern world, and didn't speak until they were in the car heading back to the penthouse. Then Sophia turned to him, taking his hand. "What happens now?" Sabin laced their fingers together. "Now we live. I rule my court as I see fit. You continue saving animals. We build something together." "Is it that simple?" "It can be, if we choose it." He lifted her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles gently. "I choose it. I choose you." Sophia felt tears prick her eyes, but they were happy ones. "I choose you too." When they reached the penthouse, the kitten was waiting, curled in her favorite spot on the sofa back. She chirped when she saw them, jumping down to wind between their legs, purring loudly. Sabin picked her up, cradling the small, warm weight, and looked at Sophia. "We need to name her. It's past time." Sophia moved close, scratching under the kitten's chin. "What about Storm, since you found her in one?" Sabin considered, then smiled. It was the warmest expression Sophia had ever seen on his face, completely unguarded and genuine. "Storm, yes, that fits perfectly." The kitten purred louder, as if agreeing. They moved to the sofa, settling together with Storm between them, and for a long moment they just sat in comfortable silence, the city lights glittering beyond the windows, the weight of the challenge behind them, the future spreading out ahead. "I haven't asked you properly," Sabin said suddenly, his tone serious. "This life I'm offering, it's complicated. You'd be tied to the vampire world, to politics and danger and a partner who can't walk in the sun. It's not fair to you." Sophia shifted to face him fully. "You're right. It's not what I imagined for myself, but neither were you, and I can't imagine my life without you now. I don't want fair. I want real. I want this." She gestured to encompass the space, the moment, them. "I want you and Storm, and whatever future we build together. Yes, it'll be complicated, but show me a life that isn't." Sabin's expression cracked into something vulnerable and hopeful. "You're certain?" "Completely." He kissed her then, soft and sure, a promise sealed between them. When they separated, Storm mewed indignantly at being squished, and they both laughed. "We'll need a bigger place," Sophia said, looking around. "If I'm moving in, somewhere with room for Storm to play and maybe other rescues eventually. A real home." "I know a place," Sabin's eyes gleamed. "Old estate on the edge of the city, built over a century ago by vampires, so it's already adapted for nightlife. Grounds for Storm to explore safely, and rooms enough for whatever future we want to fill them with." "That sounds perfect." They spent the rest of the night making plans, talking about the practical details of combining their lives, occasionally interrupted by Storm demanding attention or playtime. It felt normal and domestic and impossibly precious given where they'd started. As dawn approached and Sabin reluctantly prepared to retreat to the interior rooms away from windows, he paused in the doorway and looked back at Sophia, who was gathering Storm's toys from around the living room. "I thought I knew what strength was," he said quietly. "A century of ruling taught me to be hard, untouchable, cold. Then I heard a kitten crying in a storm, and I couldn't walk past. That small moment of weakness, as I would have called it then, brought me to you. It brought me back to myself." He paused, his voice rough with emotion. "You were right. What I thought was softness was really strength. The strength to change, to grow, to love. I've lived for over 100 years, but I think my life truly started a month ago, in a storm, with a drowning kitten and a veterinary receptionist who looked at me like I was someone worth knowing." Sophia's throat was tight. You are worth knowing. You're worth loving. As are you. He crossed back to her, cupped her face in his cool hands and kissed her forehead. Get some sleep. When you wake, we'll go look at that estate. I'll dream about it, Sophia promised. He smiled and disappeared into the depths of the penthouse as the first rays of sun began touching the horizon. Sophia settled on the sofa with Storm, who immediately curled into a purring ball against her side and closed her eyes. She was asleep within minutes, dreaming of old estates and new beginnings, of a life built between sunset and sunrise, of a love that had started with a simple act of kindness and grown into something neither of them had expected, but both of them needed. The estate was perfect. 3 stories of Gothic architecture wrapped in climbing ivy, with grounds that stretched across 5 acres of carefully maintained gardens and wild spaces. The interior was all dark wood and stone fireplaces, tall windows with heavy shutters, secret passages that dated back to when vampires needed to hide, and modern amenities cleverly integrated into the historic structure. Storm took to it immediately, racing through the empty rooms with kitten enthusiasm, claiming spaces as her own. Sophia walked through each room holding Sabin's hand, mentally furnishing them, imagining their life unfolding in these spaces. It needs work, Sabin said as they stood in what would be the master bedroom, a vast space with a fireplace and windows facing east that could be completely shuttered. Updating, personalizing, but the bones are good. It's incredible. Sophia spun slowly, taking it all in. I can see us here. So can I. He pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her waist. I want to give you everything, Sophia. Not just a house, but a life. Safety, joy, love, purpose. Whatever you need. She turned in his arms, looking up at him. I just need you. The rest is extra. You have me. Completely. They sealed the promise with a kiss that tasted of future and hope, while somewhere in the house, Storm meowed triumphantly, having conquered yet another empty room. The months that followed were busy with moving, renovating, settling in. Sophia continued working at the clinic, though she cut back to part-time so she could be awake more during Sabin's active hours. He introduced her properly to the court, and while there were vampires who disapproved of their king's human partner, most accepted her with cautious respect that slowly warmed into genuine welcome. Lucian became an unexpected friend, visiting often with books or wine or simply conversation, treating Sophia as an equal rather than an oddity. Other members of the court followed his lead, and gradually, Sophia found herself woven into the fabric of vampire society in ways she'd never anticipated. Storm grew from a fragile kitten into a sleek young cat with a personality bigger than her body. She ruled the estate with feline authority, charming everyone who visited, reminding them all of the moment that had started everything. One evening, nearly 6 months after the challenge, Sophia and Sabin sat in the estate's library, Storm sprawled across both their laps, a fire crackling in the hearth. They'd spent the day hosting a small gathering of court members, and while it had gone well, they were both relieved to have the house to themselves again. I've been thinking, Sabin said, absently stroking Storm's fur, about something Cassius said during the challenge. Sophia looked up from her book. What? He accused me of softening. At the time, I defended it as strength, but he wasn't entirely wrong. I have softened. He paused, meeting her eyes. And I'm grateful for it. That hardness, that isolation, it kept me safe, but it also kept me empty. I don't want to go back to that, ever. You won't have to. Sophia set her book aside, giving him her full attention. You're not alone anymore. No, I'm not. His expression was serious. I want to make that permanent, official. Sophia's heart skipped. What do you mean? Sabin shifted, carefully moving Storm to the side so he could face Sophia fully. Then, to her shock, he slid off the sofa and onto one knee. From his pocket, he produced a small velvet box. Sophia White, he began, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. You walked into my life at my lowest moment, even though I didn't know I was there. You saw past the king, past the vampire, past the century of armor I'd built around myself, and you found the person underneath. You made me remember what it meant to care, to love, to live, rather than simply exist. I want to spend whatever time we have, your lifetime and whatever comes after, building a home and a life with you. Will you marry me? He opened the box to reveal a ring that caught the firelight, a dark sapphire surrounded by diamonds, elegant and timeless and perfect. Sophia's hands flew to her mouth, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Yes," she gasped. "Yes, absolutely yes." Sabin's face broke into a grin of pure joy. He slipped the ring onto her finger, then rose and pulled her into his arms, kissing her deeply, while Storm, disturbed by all the movement, meowed her disapproval before settling back down. When they broke apart, both laughing and crying at once, Sophia looked at the ring on her finger, then at the man who'd given it to her. "I love you," she said, the words feeling both ancient and brand new. "I love you," he replied, "more than I thought possible." They held each other as the fire burned low, making plans and promises, while outside the estate windows, the city glittered in the darkness, full of life and possibility. The wedding took place 6 months later in the estate's garden, at midnight under a sky full of stars. It was a small ceremony, witnessed by Sabin's inner court and Sophia's family and closest friends who'd been carefully initiated into the truth of what Sabin was and what their daughter's life would be. Lucian stood as best man, and Jenny from the clinic served as maid of honor, and Storm wore a tiny bow tie that she tolerated with feline dignity. The ceremony itself was a blend of human and vampire traditions, vows spoken in English and the old language of the court, rings exchanged under the moonlight, witnessed by both worlds. When Sabin kissed his bride, the gathered crowd erupted in applause, and Sophia felt a happiness so complete it seemed impossible to contain. The reception lasted until dawn, music and laughter filling the estate, and when the last guests finally departed and the sun began to rise, Sabin and Sophia retreated to their bedroom, now truly theirs in every sense. "Mrs. Thorne," Sabin said, testing the name as he pulled Sophia close. She smiled against his chest. "I like the sound of that." "So do I." He tilted her face up, his expression tender. "Thank you for taking a chance on a vampire king who didn't know how to be soft." "Thank you for rescuing a kitten in a storm and bringing her to my clinic," Sophia replied. "Best decision you ever made." "Second best," he kissed her gently. "The best was falling in love with you." As the sun rose over the city and the estate settled into daytime quiet, Sophia reflected on the strange path that had brought them here. A stormy night, a drowning kitten, a man who'd forgotten how to care, learning to love again. It had been messy and complicated, and occasionally dangerous, but it had also been real and true, and entirely worth it. She fell asleep in her husband's arms with Storm purring at the foot of the bed, secure in the knowledge that whatever challenges came next, they would face them together. The Vampire King had softened more in the past year than he had in the previous century. That softness had become their greatest strength. It had opened doors they'd both forgotten existed, led them to each other, built them a home that was more than just walls and rooms but a true sanctuary. And it had all started with a simple choice: to stop when he heard something crying, to help when it would have been easier to walk away, to allow himself to care, even though caring meant risk. In the end, that was the truest kind of strength. Not the ability to endure alone, but the courage to open your heart even when you've been hurt before. To trust that softness can coexist with power, that love can make you stronger rather than weaker, that after a century of cold isolation, warmth is still possible. Sabin had learned that lesson, and it had transformed not just him, but his entire world. And Sophia, who had opened the door to a drenched stranger holding a dying kitten, had found a love deeper and truer than she'd ever imagined possible. Together, with a cat named Storm as their witness and catalyst, they built a life that proved love could bridge any divide, even the one between mortality and eternity. Years passed in the estate on the edge of the city. Sophia continued her work at the clinic, becoming a partner and expanding their services to include exotic animals and rescue operations. Sabin's rule continued to evolve, his court becoming known for its balance of tradition and progress, feared for its strength but also respected for its fairness. Together, they hosted gatherings that brought together vampires and trusted humans, slowly building bridges between the worlds in ways that would have been impossible before. Storm grew into a regal older cat, eventually joined by other rescues that Sabin and Sophia couldn't resist bringing home. The estate filled with life, both animal and human, becoming a place of warmth in a world that often felt cold. They faced challenges, of course. Other vampires who questioned Sabin's choices, human politicians who wanted to exploit or eliminate the vampire population, the constant negotiation of a relationship that existed between two very different worlds. But they faced everything together, and each challenge overcome only strengthened their bond. On their 5th anniversary, they stood in the same garden where they'd married, watching Storm stalk through the flower beds with her usual feline grace, now joined by 2 younger cats who'd learned everything from her. "Do you ever regret it?" Sophia asked quietly. "The softening, the changes, choosing this life over the safer isolation?" Sabin pulled her close, his expression contemplative. "Not for a single moment. That isolation wasn't safety. It was a prison I'd built for myself, stone by stone, year by year, until I'd forgotten what it felt like to actually live." He kissed her temple. "You freed me from that. Storm freed me from that. The moment I chose to stop for a crying kitten in a storm drain, I chose life over mere existence. I chose to feel again. And every moment since has been worth whatever risks came with it." Sophia leaned into him, watching the cats play in the fading evening light. "I never imagined my life would look like this." "Neither did I." His voice was warm with contentment. "But I cannot imagine it any other way now." As twilight deepened into true night and stars began appearing overhead, they walked back to the house hand in hand, their cats following in a procession, the windows glowing with welcoming light. Inside, their home waited, full of the memories they'd built and the future they were still creating together. The vampire king, who had ruled alone for a century, now ruled with a partner at his side. His council respected him more for it, not less. The veterinary receptionist who'd opened a door one stormy night now lived in a Gothic estate and moved between 2 worlds with grace and confidence. And the kitten who'd been drowning in a storm drain grew into a beloved cat who presided over their household like the queen she believed herself to be. It was a strange, unlikely, beautiful life, built from a moment of compassion, sustained by love, strengthened by the choice to remain soft in a hard world. And as Sabin and Sophia settled in their library for the evening, Storm claiming her usual spot between them, both of them felt the deep contentment of having found exactly where they belonged. The story that had begun in a storm with a cry for help had become a love story for the ages, proof that even ancient hearts could learn to beat anew, that courage came in many forms, and that sometimes the bravest thing a person could do was allow themselves to care. They had everything they needed: love, purpose, partnership, and a very spoiled cat who would never let them forget that she was the true beginning of it all. And in the end, that was more than enough. It was everything.